Like most things in our times, the basketball world is full of questions that may not have an answer that makes everyone happy. Whenever the GOAT debate and the toughness of the league are brought to the table, we can find almost unlimited arguments from people trying to defend their beliefs. Of course, that doesn't necessarily mean that each opinion will be taken into account by most people. After all, not even the most popular media members have the power to convince everyone what they're saying is the absolute truth. However, there's a group of people whose opinions have a lot more credibility when it comes to the game, and that's retired NBA superstars. Whenever a living legend opens up about the way basketball is played nowadays, everyone listens. So, when Hall of Famer Kevin Garnett decided to talk about how players from his era would fare in today's league, basketball fans paid attention. But unlike other players turned commentators like Charles Barkley and Shaquille O'Neal, Garnett had a lot of praise for today's players and the way the game has evolved. And instead of talking about how things used to be better a few decades ago, he had some hard words for his peers. As he said, they wouldn't be able to play in today's league. And of course, a lot of people may disagree with his stance, but even then, it's worth wondering whether he actually has a point. And today, we'll take a deeper look at his words to figure it out. Garnett has always been known for speaking his mind out whenever he has a chance, whether it was trash-talking opponents on the court or giving a controversial opinion in front of the media. He's rarely kept things for himself. So when he was asked about his take on the current state of the league, everyone knew he would give an honest answer. However, given the frequent criticism of players from his era to the way the game is played today, probably no one expected him to praise current-day players. And even less so at the expense of his former teammates and rivals. He didn't directly criticize players from his era, but there are probably a few retired players out there that may have taken his comments as an offense. After all, it's become usual for former stars to complain about how many threes are taken today or how defenses are not as good as they used to be. So hearing one of them say something different feels quite strange, and especially considering Garnett is the one saying it. Back in the day, he was one of the most intimidating defenders in the league. Considering his mid-range shot was a lethal weapon, he probably would have been an efficient shooter from long range if he had needed to take more shots from outside the line. He's also one of the last big men to have won an MVP along with Tim Duncan and Dirk Nowitzki. So, considering most of the things he did well have essentially been ignored during the last few years, it would have been reasonable for a player like him to feel displeased with the way the game is played today. But since it's been the exact opposite, let's start by adding some context to his words. First of all, he mentioned the increased pace of today's game as a reason why players from 20 years ago wouldn't be able to keep up. Specifically, he talked about how players have to run from one corner to the other, shoot a three, and then repeat the same process all over again throughout a full 48 minutes. He continued by adding that playing high-level defense is much more difficult than it was when he started playing. Back then, players could hand-check their opponents to slow them down with their physicality, but now they have to think about taking away certain angles or contesting shots in specific ways to try to be effective in the defensive end. That would have made it almost impossible to defend someone like Michael Jordan a few decades ago, and it means players have to be smarter than ever to make an impact on the game. Last but not least, he praised the impact that guys like Steph Curry and Damian Lillard have made on the game, while also mentioning how players could thrive on offense if they were creative enough. After all, the shots from half court, the step backs, the ankle-breaking dribbling moves, and the hyper-athletic dunks were not all that common when he came into the league, but now they're an important part of almost every game, and he believes basketball is in a great place because of it. But does that mean the game is better than it was 20 years ago? Well, there's no doubt the game we know today is way different than it was when Garnett came into the league. Players are more skilled and athletic than ever before. Shooting has a bigger role than the ability to play in the post, and it seems like games become faster every year. From a business standpoint, basketball is probably at its peak when it comes to entertainment. Every game, players are making phenomenal dunks, dribbling moves, and circus shots. And just like Garnett said, those who are creative enough on the offensive end shine the brightest. However, many people believe things have been made too easy for the recent generations of players. With the changes in the rules and the emphasis on analytics, some argue the essence of the game is no longer the same, and that high-scoring numbers are not necessarily an indication of elite skill. In fact, with scoring increasing every year and defenses not as tight as they used to be, high-scoring games have become more usual every time. And to find samples of it, we only need to take a look at the performances of Jamal Murray and Donovan Mitchell during their first-round matchup in last year's playoffs. Of course, that doesn't mean anyone can just take the ball and score 50 whenever they feel like it. Putting such performances requires great skill and instincts, as well as awareness on how to exploit a defense from anywhere on the court. But if you ask old fans and most retired players, they'll probably agree that it would have been more difficult for current-day players to score as much if there was hand-checking or if courts were not as open because of the increased volume in three-point shots. So, even though it's evident NBA players are becoming more and more talented as the years go by, we can also tell the current rules and the way the game is oriented is helping them produce higher numbers than players from previous eras. But going back to Garnett's comments, would players from his era be unable to perform at a high level in today's league? We've heard a lot of comments from people who believe Jordan would be able to average 50 points per game if he played today. Retired players like Shaq have also insisted they would be even more dominant than they were in the respective eras if they were part of today's league, but the truth is, it depends on the player. For instance, someone like Garnett probably wouldn't have any kind of issues adapting his game to fit today's standards. His body, defensive presence, and offensive skill set would allow him to excel if he managed to extend his shooting range beyond the three-point line. And even if he couldn't do that, he would do wonders as a small ball five. Jordan would definitely be able to perform at a high level. His offensive repertoire would allow him to score over anybody, and he would only need to work on his shooting range as well. But a player like Shaq would probably have some difficulties in today's league. He wouldn't receive as many touches in the post as he did when he was in his prime, and without a reliable jumper, there's a chance he wouldn't see too much action in late-game situations. Still, most former stars would probably find a way to get things done. The talent is not in question, but whether their bodies would be able to handle the stress of today's game is a different question. If there's something that current players are doing differently from retired players, is focusing on taking care of their bodies. In the past, aging players would slowly stop being effective, and the careers of many of them finished earlier than expected because of injuries. But now, players are taking pride in extending their careers as long as possible. The improvements in science and medicine have helped them avoid injuries and recover from them more effectively. But that's not the only factor. They're aware they can play longer if they follow certain diets and exercising patterns. So they're investing a lot of their money and time in their body health, and the results are impressive. Of course, that doesn't mean they found a way to escape Father Time. Most players not named LeBron still see a small decline in their games as the years go by, but many of them are still capable of playing at a high level despite being well into their 30s. But despite all of the progress, injuries are still an issue that most players go through. In fact, torn ACLs and ruptured Achilles remain career-altering threats that usually affect high-usage players. Some people have theorized the high pace of games is making an impact on the frequency of these injuries. So if that's the case with players that prepare themselves for that kind of grind, how would the bodies of stars who played in a slower era react to the added stress of having to play in a faster and more taxing game? Many people assume being an NBA player in today's league is an easy thing to do, but they often ignore the work they put in their games and bodies to do the things they do on a daily basis. Running up and down the court over and over again while also making plays is very demanding for the body. And even more so when you have to do it 4 or 5 times a week while also having to follow an intense training regime for a full season. So while it's easy to point out the flaws of today's players, putting in the work required to succeed in the current NBA is not. It's their work and they get paid a lot to do it. That doesn't mean anyone can do it, and that may include players who became stars by playing in a much slower era. All in all, we are aware there's no real way of telling what certain players could or couldn't do in different situations. However, hearing a player like Garnett talk objectively about the difficulties that current-day players go through is a pleasant surprise. Most of the time, people underestimate the effort that NBA players put into their craft, and that includes retired players who seem to be caught up in the past at times. But the truth is that playing at a high level in today's league requires a lot of effort and dedication. So, players deserve to be acknowledged, and it's good to see KG knows that. But now, what is your opinion on this matter? Do you believe former players would be able to play in today's league? Let us know in the comments. Say, we hope you've enjoyed today's video, and if you did, remember to give us a like and subscribe to our channel for more NBA content. We are Courtside.